So yeah, thank you for joining. You can go to the next slide. Just to give you a quick overview, we're going to do some announcements. Someone raised their hand. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like a comment that they can't hear us or something. But the first announcement is any questions that you do have, please use the Q&A tool, and we will be looking through that throughout the town hall, and then at the very end we'll be able to address all those questions as well as the questions that were submitted through the Google form earlier. Sam will be taking over and going into Atlas status, and then better know a breeding code, and then we'll kick it to Megan and Q&A. And yeah, Sam, Justin, Megan, let me know. Some people are raising their hands. I just want to make sure it's not because there's any AV issues. But so announcements, really quick. There've been you can skip slide. One really cool thing. There is an app. It's only for iPhone, but it's called Birdathon. And it was created by this one of our regional coordinators in San Luis Obispo County, California, Barry Langdon Lazane. It's called Birdathon, and it's free. And we've heard a lot, from people who want to access the Atlas blocks when they don't have cell coverage. It can be hard to do that when you're in an eBird list. Birdathon allows you to pre-download all of that, and you can have zero service at all, and you can still see exactly the block boundaries, where you are. If you just tap on a block, it tells you the name of the block. It also has built-in, we were getting pictures of people who had like taped the breeding codes on the back of their phone and stuff, which was awesome. But we thought it would be great to have just an easy app where you could just view all of this. And so that's also included now in this app called Birdathon. And we'll provide links to that, or you could just search in the App Store for Birdathon. There's also a video now on our YouTube channel that Barry made that kind of talks through how to use it. But it's really simple. It's free. And yeah, unfortunately right now it's just for iPhone, but it's a great resource. I use it all the time. Moving on. Just as a little sneak peek, we are working on organizing a Bird Atlas big weekend. I will be reaching out to all of our founding partners about this, if not tomorrow, early next week. We're looking at like late May, early June. We've done some analysis on when it would be, the best time, and just wanted to let you know that that's in the pipeline and will be happening. We've just been swamped with a lot of other stuff, so haven't been able to like get all the branding and everything done yet, or pick the exact dates yet. But the idea will be for like all of our founding partners, or as many that can host events, and then also even folks who are in areas without partners to host their own field trips and stuff. So just to put that on your radar, it's happening. It's going to be awesome. Next slide. Merch. Also getting a lot of questions about merch. Don't worry, it's coming. This hat here is the prototype. It's the only one that exists in the world. If someone wants to, I'll sell for $1,000. How about that? One of one. But all joking aside, we will be coming out with merch soon. Not just hats, but also bumper stickers and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's coming soon. Next slide. Donations. We've been just so grateful for everyone who's been donating. Every time, or last time we did a town hall, we had a big influx of donations, and yeah, like I think I've said before, every time we get one, I get an email that's like someone donated, and I do a little whoop sound, and it's kind of embarrassing because there's no one else around and I'm making weird sounds. But we're very grateful, and your donations allow our team to build and build capacity, and to continue this incredible start to this 5-year project. Next slide. And moving on, I'm going to kick it to Sam Saffron, CBA's Science Director, to provide some updates on our new segment, or second time using it. I just love saying it. Atlas status. Take it away, Sam.
Yeah, we talked probably for at least 5 minutes this week about why that was pleasing to say. We like really got into it and figured it out. We didn't figure it out. We determined it was a close rhyme, and that's about it. All right, so engagement. It's been really, really fun to watch these numbers trickle in about how we are all atlasing and what the cumulative impact has looked like. The first one that is the one we go to every day. It's so satisfying to check the eBird project and to see that number at the bottom of the usership growing. But as of earlier this week, I didn't check today, but a day or two ago, we had passed 3,350 contributors. So that was really satisfying to see when we crossed that 3,000 number in March. Anytime you cross a round number, it's very nice. This, we don't expect this to grow forever, but right now we're savoring it, and we this is not a competition. But we are comparing ourselves to other states who have done this through eBird. How could we not? New York is the kind of largest state that has done an eBird project. Breeding bird atlas through eBird, and it took them 3 years to cross 3,000 contributors to the atlas. So, California is bigger than New York, but we're ahead of schedule. So that's all, we're very grateful to New York for trailblazing, and but that was really, really awesome. If you tuned in last month, I we showed a chart like this, which was the number of breeding codes submitted in California, comparing the last 5 years to this year. And January and February, January was like a 700% increase over previous years. February, similar. When you add up all the months, March was like, we're still crushing it. Breeding code use is up more than 500% since the project has launched over last year, and we've had more than 75,000 checklists submitted to the project. We should all be proud of ourselves for that. We also started looking a little bit at the spatial coverage. And what this map is showing is every Atlas block with the breeding code through April 14th of this year. And it's about 28% of blocks that have received a code over the first 3.5 months of this 5-year effort. And then what we were curious to see is like, is this any different from previous years, or is this just like what it always is in eBird? Are we actually impacting like where collectively eBirders are spending their time and submitting data? So this is the same map, except I'm color coding as a darker shade of orange the blocks that didn't have any coverage at this time last year. And so we've basically doubled the spatial extent of blocks that have received a breeding code compared to 2025. So the light orange are both 2025 and 2026, and the dark orange is 2026 only. So again, we've doubled that spatial coverage. So this is so important for having a comprehensive atlas and to continue to grow this over time. But this was another one that we were very pleased to see these early results on. We thought it'd be fun to check in every once in a while on the top 10 species, and we'll probably have other variations of this. But if anyone wants to put in the chat what they think the number one species in terms of most confirmed blocks, I'm sure some of you have just looked. There's a way to do this on the eBird project. But put it in your head, give yourself a second. All right, lock in your answers. I'm going to start with number 3 and then work our way up to 1. So number 3, most confirmed blocks is red-tailed hawk. Beautiful photo here of a pair on a nest by Catbird. They have been confirmed in 381 blocks. Number 2 is bush tits, 473 blocks. Here's a photo of a nestling by Scott Templeton. And actually, I believe bush tit was number 1 until very recently. So we have a new bird on top, and that would be the common raven. Lots of these confirmations are probably you seeing a bird carrying a stick over the road or a nest on a tower. very conspicuous and easy to confirm. That's been done in 487 blocks. And here's a bird carrying nesting material to a nest by Audrey Pappison. Number one. So we'll check in on this list in the future, see if the rankings are changing at all as different species reach their peak of their breeding seasons and whatnot. I have the ones that are just outside the top 10, song sparrow, oak titmouse, bluebird, etc., to keep an eye on there. But rounding out the top 10 was house finch, Anna's hummingbird, crow, starling, black phoebe, house sparrow, cliff swallow. Um, fun to watch this. Okay, the next segment we're gonna highlight. There's so many. We have surpassed 190 species that have been confirmed over the course of the atlas so far, which is incredible. I'm highlighting two since the last time we had a town hall. The first one is this turkey vulture confirmation by Tobias Felbeck on March 26th in the Acorn Hollow Southeast Block in Tehama. Um, I heard from Tobias. Tobias was doing rangeland surveys for the BALM, and they were walking along, and a turkey vulture flushed out of a cave, and they took a quick peek and a quick photo, and they saw that there were eggs in there, and they moved along, and this was the very first confirmation for turkey vulture in the project. It's like a notoriously tricky one to actually confirm as a breeder. So the eggs are. I'm not. I hope you can see my mouse, but it's going around the eggs right now back there in the cave. It's a really remote landscape. They were out there doing this field work and saw that, so that's really exciting. The other one that I just had to share was this northern pygmy owl from April 3rd by Peter in the Figueroa Mountain Central East block in Santa Barbara. Peter saw this is a great comment, and I just also want to highlight these awesome comments because these help so much when we're reviewing records to have detailed notes like this. But Peter saw a bird perched holding a lizard in its talon, and after a few minutes of watching, flew over their head, holding the lizard to a cavity opening in a nearby sycamore tree, photographed here, and landed at the opening. After a few seconds, it flew away from the cavity and landed in a branch facing me. It no longer had the lizard, so it delivered lizard to the nest there. That was an
Just
awesome
gotta
way.
say, that is so friggin' cool. My,
Yeah, great way. First confirmation
I mean, the first confirmation to be that
with
is
the
so
photo.
cool. With the photo, oh my gosh, so cool.
Really, really fun. Welcome to the list. Last little segment here on Atlas status are some notable records. And this is, I want to highlight a new thing we're doing on the back end, which is as data are submitted to us, we are kind of cross-referencing them against the known breeding ranges of these species so that we can identify really notable records that might be range expansions or outside of the known range, so that we can get more notes if needed or follow up if needed, or just be aware of them and track and celebrate those. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of eBird status and trends. If you go to the science section of the eBird website, you can find these maps. But for every species in the US, more or less, we have these modeled products that are based on eBird data that we all submit, and they're combined with environmental layers and really advanced statistical models to generate these maps of where birds are on the landscape. And these can be thought of as our best available estimates. They're informed by the data, but they are modeled statistical products. And there are cases where birds are going to fall outside of this modeled range. In some cases, it's because there's insufficient data on a species in a particular area, or perhaps there's been really recent changes since this was last run, that sort of thing. So this is one reason we're checking records against these maps, but these are what we're using so far to compare new confirmed records against. And just as an example, the purple map I was showing was the house sparrow modeled product, and that's the purple is now the light green here, and the dark green circles are confirmed records submitted by atlasers of house sparrow to the project within that range, and the red circles are confirmed records submitted to the project outside of the modeled range. So there's 477 confirmed inside the range, 47 confirmed outside the range. Um, and just highlighting one of those, one of these red dots down here is this beautiful photo of a house sparrow carrying nesting material. It's 20 kilometers from the nearest location that was modeled as house sparrow range. So maybe that's like a new area of human habitation, new structures. Maybe there's something else about the habitat that's not well captured in the environmental variables used by Cornell to model these range, or it's new. Whatever it is, this is an example of really valuable data, both to capture and document really well with either good notes or photos like this. So you may see us reaching out to you about if you are skilled and lucky enough to document a species outside of the range. It's a good chance we might follow up with you to encourage fully documenting that for posterity. And that's not to quiz or doubt people. It's just to make this data set as strong as possible into the future. A few other examples of this. Here's the dark-eyed juncos modeled range and a few records falling outside of that. And in Davis, there have been a few dark-eyed junco confirmed records. Here's one from Rob Furrow, male with massive beak full of larvae and a big adult scarab beetle carrying food. So this is a species that has had a lot of range expansions over the last century. And perhaps that is occurring on the valley floor as well in some of these urban areas. I'm going to skip just for the sake of time. Here's one with a photo, Vermilion flycatcher in Tulare County by Joan Parker and Nancy Bruce. This is a nest with young that they documented. It is the county first breeding confirmation that's been coded on eBird. That's not to say there haven't been others, but if you just filter on ones that actually have had the codes applied, it is the first one for the county. So that is really exciting, and things like this pop right out of our analysis. And the last one to highlight here, Justin flagged this one for me. Ruddy duck. This is the first confirmation for the project as a whole, and it is outside of the modeled range for ruddy duck. It's an apparent first for the San Diego deserts by Paulette in Borrego Springs, I think in a kind of, in a pond there. So that I just kind of want to introduce some of the workflows we're using to kind of filter and screen and surface important data, and that's sort of what it looks like, and it has led to some awesome records. Next up is better know breeding code. I'm going to reuse a slide from the last town hall. So if you know this and don't need a refresher, you can tune out for 1 minute. But one we're seeing a lot and is increasingly more relevant is occupied nest site, ON, which is a confirmed code, versus N, visiting a probable nest site, which is a probable code. So just because you see a bird sitting on, standing on, visiting a nest quite briefly, that does not necessarily mean occupied nest site. Occupied nest site is meant to be used in cases where the bird is you can clearly tell, or you can safely ascertain that the bird is incubating eggs or brooding young. So typically, this would be a bird sitting low in the nest for an extended period of time, incubating. For cavity nesters, you'd want to just not see a bird pop in and out. That's not an occupied nest. You'd want them to enter for a long period of time and remain. And that varies a little bit from species to species, but the main message here is like any bird touching a nest does not necessarily mean occupied nest. You want to the goal there is that it means there's incubation or brooding happening. And if it's a quick visit, you can use this probable code, which is still important and valid of visiting a probable nest site. And in general, I've hammered this a lot tonight, but please take notes, especially for confirmed species. There have been so many, it's understandable, but just typos. You click the wrong button, you don't mean to, you click it on the wrong species. So even just like kind of repeating the code and the name of the species in your notes it lets us know that it wasn't a typo. And I'll have some other one more slide on useful notes. Add media if you have it. Talk about what you actually saw. This is also useful if you're not exactly sure on the right code to use. Just in a lot of detail, say what you observed. And if we need to reinterpret that at a later date, you're giving us the information to do that. So here are some great examples of theoretical comments. But the female made 3 trips into the shrubs with worms, carrying food. So that's great. It tells us why that code was used and reaffirms that it was the right one. And reviewers, Justin, Megan, myself, Van, we're here to help. I said this last time, but we aim to always approach you like very kindly and with an open mind. We're not doubting or quizzing. We're trying to learn and be courteous, and hopefully that can go both ways at all times. And just as a way to improve your notes, here's an example of some questions you can ask yourself to try to answer. And these are for nest with eggs. So for any code, the most like important thing to add is how did you confirm that particular code? So for nest with eggs, how did you confirm eggs were present? State clearly if you saw them. Um, how did you identify the eggs as belonging to this species? Maybe it was really obvious because you saw an adult incubating them and then the adult left. And that's how you did it, but let us know. And then you could talk about the eggs, how many were there, that's valuable info, what they look like. You could talk about the nest, where it was located, the tree species, things like that, what the structure of it was it cup nest, a cavity nest, what was the materials, grass or sticks, and what were the adults doing? Just run through this checklist for yourself. Maybe when you get back to your house at the end of the day, you can add some of these to that checklist if you're busy in the field. But we hope to provide like a comprehensive list for all the codes on what these can look like. All right, that's all for Atlas status. We're
Thank
turning it
you,
over to the main event.
Sam. Thank you, Sam. Very excited to have Megan Jankowski do a presentation on finding breeding birds. We've heard so much from birders and atlasers about how contributing to the atlas has just fundamentally changed the way they bird in really exciting and good ways. And I feel that myself. Not only am I just kind of quickly ticking off Black Phoebe and moving on, but I'm kind of, oh, what's going on? That Black Phoebe is acting a little weird. And I heard early on from Whitney Grover at Golden Gate Bird Alliance about Megan. And, told me that Megan was one of the best nest finders and searchers of breeding birds she knows, and we were very very pleased when Megan agreed to come on as one of the co-review coordinators that we have. Megan and Justin serve in that role. I won't give the whole bio. But yeah, excited to kick it to Megan, and I myself am excited to learn from Megan because, as I'm sure all of you have learned, um, finding breeding birds is harder and different than just looking for a certain species. And so, with that, we'll kick it to the next slide and kick it to Megan.
Okay, so Sam and Van put this slide in here. This is one of my more notable experiences lately on the Atlas. And, I live in Oakland. I work in San Francisco. I'm constantly in like city parks just staring into bushes. And yesterday I even got stopped by a security guard asking me, can I help you in this alley where you're staring into a bush? Um, but yeah, this was a couple of weeks ago, and I was showing a friend this nest colony of black-crowned night herons and snowy egrets in Oakland. And 2 people walked by and asked, do you know what kind of birds those are? And said, oh yeah, they're black-crowned night herons and those are snowy egrets. And then I looked and just said, oh my God, are you Nini Coco? And Nini is a current contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race, which I am a really big fan of, and is actually a contender for the crown tomorrow night. So good luck, Nini. Nini's also kind of a nature nerd, so that was a really, really fun experience.
Awesome. And then Megan will share her.
I'm gonna share.
Ginger says, Megan, this is the best anecdote.
Oh, how do I get my little, you can't see
Look,
my little video, can you?
looks great.
Okay. So finding breeding birds. I love finding nests. I love breeding birds. I love finding nests for even just common birds around my house. And one thing that I want you to take away from this talk is that finding breeding evidence and nests is a learnable skill. So I worked for 5 years as a nest searcher in Arizona. When I first got there, I didn't know anything really about finding nests. I probably had been a birder for maybe less than a year at that point, but I was willing to learn. I had some really good teachers. And from there, I learned how to do it. And I learned how to teach other people who were also new at it. So that's just one thing I want you to take away. If you're new at birding, or if you're like, very experienced at birding, but aren't really into sitting down and watching what was that pigeon doing? It doesn't have a nest. Then I hope that this talk can kind of give you some skills. Okay, it would help if I knew how to click to the next slide. Okay, so breeding birds are everywhere. They are all around us. Like I said, I live in Oakland. All of these pictures were taken probably within 2 miles of either my home or my office. So we've got Anna's hummingbird, a pigeon at Bart. On the right, that's a white-crowned sparrow nest a block from my house. On the bottom there is a hooded oriole nest. They're nesting again in that same tree this year. That picture's from last year. And then, of course, a family of geese over at actually what is a park surrounded by the Port of Oakland. So it's very industrial. All right, I'm not going to get too much into the details of how to atlas because Van and Sam have already covered that extensively in previous webinars and on the website. But we are all familiar with this, setup. So the thing about the bird atlas and eBird in general is you're always coding for the highest level of behavior. So if you find for an example, a nest with young, and then you find another bird of the same species building a nest during that same checklist, you're kind of missing out reporting that nest building activity because you're coding for the nest with young. You can always put that extra data in the checklist comments, which we encourage, but you can also kind of supplement your Atlas data and join NestWatch. This is another Cornell website and an app, and I've been using NestWatch for years. I know a lot of people are, you can be kind of sensitive about sharing nest locations, being descriptive in your eBird checklists. And I kind of get around that by, if there's a park that I go to a lot where I find a lot of nests, I might in my eBird checklist say, mourning dove on first nest, nestlings in second nest. But what I'm doing is I'm going into NestWatch and I'm actually logging those records. So I have a more detailed log of it in NestWatch. And there's a yeah, Sam wanted me to mention that we will eventually be bringing NestWatch data into the Atlas, but it's not going to happen immediately. So if you put anything in NestWatch that you're not putting into the eBird portal, it's not going to show on the Atlas website. It's not going to show in the maps. So you can use a hybrid approach, or if you really just want to use NestWatch, you can do that too. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say about NestWatch, and I guess I might get into this a little bit more later, is that it has a really good nest monitoring manual that is basically the same or similar protocol that I used when I did nest searching and monitoring professionally. So if you do choose to nest monitor with NestWatch, for example, the very basics of nest monitoring are figuring out the timing of the nest and the length of incubation and nestling periods and determining the success of the nest. So you're looking for all these questions on the right. When was the first egg laid? For example, I found a white-crowned sparrow nest with eggs this year in early February, or mid-February, which is still very early and crazy. And so it's great to, gather that kind of data. And then, you're looking at how many eggs have hatched. Did the nestlings fledge? Did they fail? If not, why? Did you know why? So I am going to talk about searching for nests. You don't need to find nests to participate in the atlas, but you inevitably will. And so up front, I wanted to talk about precautions because it's really one of the most important things to talk about in terms of protecting the birds. So the first issue is community science versus permitted research. So unless you're a professional biologist and you're working under a permit or some sort of project, we are basically all just doing community science here. So, we don't have permits to handle eggs, handle nestlings. So, hands off. Don't grab those little nestlings, even though they might be cute. Of course, respecting property boundaries and closed areas is just a foundation of birding ethics. And your regional coordinators might be reaching out to people to bird kind of restricted areas that we're going to get permission to bird in. But also if if you have like a private property near your house that you think is really good habitat, just reach out to the landowners, golf course, etc., whatever, and tell them what you're doing and ask if you can bird on their property, and you might be surprised. They might say yes. So the first thing you really just want to be concerned about is the safety of the birds. I mean, we're doing it for the birds, so we don't want to do anything that's going to harm them. So the most sensitive times to approach a nest are nest building and late nestling period. So when the birds are still building a nest, they haven't invested a lot of time and energy yet. So if you go up to a nest, especially if you poke at it, this is honestly I've done this. Like I did this very early on. It's like an early mistake. You're like, that is so cool. I want to look at that nest. And you're like, oh no, that bird, it knows I'm a predator. And so all it's done is put a couple of twigs together and some grass. And so it's out of there. It's like, I'm going to go build my nest somewhere else. And then if you approach a nest during late nestling period, obviously the nestlings have this growth pattern. And by the time that they're late in the nestling period, they're going to be open-eyed, alert, and they're going to be ready to jump out if something gets close to them. It's just their survival instinct. And so you just always want to make sure you're not approaching a nest, especially during those two periods. Of course, there are some species that are more sensitive than others. As people know, eBird hides certain species like black rail, certain owls from public output, so they obscure the locations of those species. Some species are more sensitive than others, just in general. And of course, we have hundreds of species in California, so it's I can't cover them all because I don't know them all, but in Arizona, where I worked, we were always told that Virginia's warblers would sometimes abandon a nest in early incubation if they saw you looking at it even once. And typically for a lot of birds, most birds that I am experienced with, if they've laid even one egg in the nest, they're not giving up that nest. That is a significant amount of time and energy and effort that they've put into it. And they're not going to abandon the nest if you just look into it quickly. And of course, the idea that birds can smell you, if you touch their babies, if a baby falls out of the nest, put it back in. The idea that they'll abandon those babies is just totally not true. They're very tenacious parents, and they will not, they will not abandon. Even if a predator takes like one egg or a nestling or a couple eggs or nestlings, like the parents are still going to come back as long as there are still eggs or young in the nest, with the exception of maybe like very excessive disturbance. All right, predators. So a lot of nests fail. There's a lot of reasons why, but the biggest one is predation. Everything is food for everyone else in Mother Nature, and that gets more intense in the spring and summer when every animal has babies to feed. So nests get preyed upon a lot, and people can actually lead predators to a nest either by visual cues or by your scent, maybe for like a mammal. I was taught never to go to and from a nest in a straight line because it creates a trail. And you want to create sort of a circular or a winding route, leaving a different way than you came. You can also pretend to like check other areas. Um, there, like that picture I had actually in the start of the white-crowned sparrow nest. I knew when I found it that it was not going to last long because it was really obvious. Like I just saw it by turning my head and looking at it, and there were always crows around. And so I was just like, those crows are totally going to find that nest. And so I was very careful about when I checked it, and trying to be mindful of the crows, coming back later if the crows were around, etc. But it still did fail. Something ate it, which I imagine was probably a crow. So really, we can collect data from nests as long as we're not, disturbing them excessively, and we don't want to interfere to the point of harm. But yeah, if you are coming to a nest all the time and checking it every day, then yeah, the bird is going to value its own life over the life of its eggs and nestlings, and so it might just check out. So if you find a nest and it is low enough that you can get a good look inside, should you? And I'm going over this especially because NestWatch does encourage you to look into nests. And that's because they want that sweet, sweet data. And it is very useful, and there are ways to do it kind of safely. So like I said, if you think the bird is still yeah, so tongue-tied. If you think the bird is still building the nest, just don't approach it. You never want to disturb or damage vegetation hiding a nest, because that is one of the times when they might just straight up abandon it. If they felt that they were safe before and they're not safe anymore, they might just be out of there. You want to look inside nests as briefly as possible. You can buy mirror poles. Sometimes I'll take my cell phone, I'll actually stick it on video and record. If a nest is maybe just a little bit higher than my head and I can't really see into it, I'll stick my phone on record and I'll put like just over the nest quickly, and then I'll walk away quickly, and then I'll check the footage to see, did it catch a egg or nestlings in there. So really you want to use binoculars as much as possible just to observe from as far away as possible. And like I said, you don't want to approach the nest when the nestlings are pretty old. If you are monitoring a nest for success or fail, like with NestWatch, you don't want to check a nest every day. Like every other day is probably good. 4 days is probably the maximum, because it gets hard to figure out what's going on if you skip more than like 4 days. If you see a bird on the nest, you just know it's still active. Great. If it's around a transition date, like hatching, and the bird is sitting on the nest, you want to wait for it to leave. You never want to flush a bird. If you are working, for example, on like a nest box project, maybe they're telling you to flush birds, or maybe it's kind of inevitable if you're checking a nest box. But just in general, don't bother the birds. And this is kind of like a reiteration of most of the things I've talked about. This is from NestWatch. So, being aware of predators, avoiding nest during bad weather, don't check really early in the morning when the birds could be laying, or late evening when they're trying to just kind of bed down for the night. And again, don't leave a dead-end trail, and this is a really good example of that. So in short, basically, you just want to monitor from a distance as much as possible. All right, so now we're actually getting into the fun stuff, which is nest searching. So nest searching, I'm using that term, but it's also just, looking for breeding evidence. So these are the real basics. Look for pairs of birds. Look to see if that bird is carrying anything. Nest material, food, fecal sacs. What do I know about this species, or what can I look up? Do I know anything about the nesting strategy of a related species? For example, like a lot of vireos, they all build little nests that are, mossy cups that hang from like a V rather than like a forked branch V rather than like on top of a branch, for example. So just things like that. Some related birds will have related sort of strategies. What do I know about this bird's typical behavior? Is it doing anything weird? And then you want to kind of think about your nest searching strategy, which I'll get to. For using available resources, these are the questions that I ask myself when I see a bird. And, if you live in an area where you know that there are certain birds that nest and you really want to find those specific birds, then just read up about them ahead of time. So first, number one, does this bird actually breed in my area, or is it just passing through, or is it an overwintering bird that's going to be gone for breeding season? Then next is what type of nest does this bird build? Is it a cavity? Is it an open cup? Is it a burrow platform, et cetera, et cetera? Where do they build? And then who builds, incubates, and feeds? So for classically a lot of birds, it's the female who does building, incubating, and feeding. For a lot of birds, also the males do it as well. I'm learning a lot more about that, and for a lot of the species where the male also does it, sometimes they like incubate and brood a lot less. It's pretty interesting species by species. And when I talk about using available resources, these are a couple of great ones. So the first one, of course, on the left is nestwatch.org. On the right is all about birds.org. And then on the bottom, I mentioned here birdsoftheworld.org. So these are all Cornell websites. You do not have to solely use Cornell information. There are books you can find, Wikipedia, you can just Google stuff. But these are the ones I go back to over and over again. And Birds of the World is a paid site, but it's very in depth and it has so much information that's really invaluable. Okay, so I'm going to take us through the timeline of nesting and sort of this is the way I think about nest searching and sort of the framework of how their behavior might differ throughout the whole process. So first they're going to pick a site and you just want to watch for pairs of birds. Sometimes you can actually see birds kind of shopping for a nest location. If you see two birds together, especially, and they aren't eating, they're not singing, and they're kind of just poking around, maybe checking out the, where like a trunk and a branch meet or a little shallow depression in the ground. They might be looking for a place to put their nest. So nest building will go on for a while, depending on the species. Like I said, this is the most likely time that they'll abandon a nest. And they'll start with sort of coarse materials and then they'll line the nest with fine materials. And nest building is a great time to find a nest because they're making repeated trips to the nest. And usually if they find a source of material that they really like, they're going to go back and forth to that source of material. So for example, this house sparrow is picking up some kind of fur and, it probably picked up a mouthful, flew to the nest, and then flew back, grabbed more fur, etc., repeat. So if you don't see where the bird went the first time, you might catch it the second time. So pre-lay and lay. So these are kind of fun times. These are generally hard times to find a nest and hard times to know if a bird is actually nesting. Because after they'll build the nest, usually they'll take a couple of days off and they won't visit the nest for a while and then they'll start laying and then they'll just go one visit per day. Sometimes they'll kind of hang out in the nest area, but sometimes they really don't. They might check in on a couple of times a day, but they'll just be off doing their own thing and eating and foraging and singing and doing what they do. I do mention this at some point, but during the laying stage, if you do catch birds copulating, they usually will copulate right in the area of the nest, sometimes the same tree, sometimes like right over the nest. And then, of course, there's incubating. Most North American songbirds, for example, don't start incubation until they've laid a full clutch. And there are a lot of birds like owls, herons, egrets, kingfishers. They'll actually do what's called asynchronous hatching, and they'll start incubating when they lay the first egg. And so all of the eggs hatch at different times, different subsequent days. And then some species, like I said, the males and the females will incubate. Like locally, we have warbling vireos and black-headed grosbeaks. The male will incubate and brood, and sometimes they'll even sing from the nest. Doves and pigeons, both the male and female will incubate, and they'll do pretty long bouts. Like mourning doves, like the male will be on the nest all day, and then the female will be on the nest all night. And for woodpeckers, especially, woodpeckers and sapsuckers are all cavity nesters. Both the parents incubate and brood. And of course, you can't see into a cavity because it's closed. And cavity nests are kind of hard to monitor. But if you catch an incubation switch, that's a great time to kind of figure out what they're doing. And usually, what will happen is one bird will fly up to the nest or to the nest tree or the area and will call. The other woodpecker that's in the nest will usually stick its head out and call and then exit, and then the other one will come in. And actually, I just saw some starlings doing this a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't even know that the males incubate, but it turns out they do. Some species do mate feed the mate on the nest. So if you see a bird bringing food to a nest, but you can't see like what's actually going on in the nest, they could be bringing food to nestlings, but they could also be bringing food to the mate. And I mentioned here at the end, so incubation period of species where only the female incubates, usually the female will be on for, let's say, maybe like 40 minutes at a time, and then she'll get off for maybe 15 minutes or so. I'm just kind of generalizing here, to go eat. So then once the eggs hatch during the first few days, the parents will spend most of the day just sitting on the nestlings if they're altricial birds. And this can make it really hard to tell if the eggs have actually hatched because this kind of early nestling period just looks a lot like incubation. If you're lucky, you might see the birds carry eggshells away from the nest. And if you're lucky, you might see them kind of like standing up and maybe poking their face into the nest. And as the nestlings grow, parents will spend less time brooding and more time feeding. And this is one of the easiest times to find a nest due to the parents just coming back and forth all the time with food. And then as the nestlings grow, they'll vocalizing more and more loudly. So then we have fledge or fail. And if even one nestling fledges, we consider that a success. And nests will fail for a variety of reasons. They can fail anytime during this point, this timeline. And here are some of the reasons why nests fail. So of course, we've got predators, we've got human interference. I used to work at a wildlife rehab, and people would call all the time, oh, the painters came and there was a house finch nest and they took it down, and what do I do with it? Et cetera, et cetera. So death of one or both parents. I actually have a white-crowned sparrow nest right now that I kind of suspect the female might have been killed because every time I go to the nest, there is no adult there. And the most likely culprit in my neighborhood is probably a cat, but we'll see. Let's see. Of course, nests can just kind of fall over, weather, et cetera, et cetera. And if a nest does fail, birds will attempt a new one unless it's just super late in the season. And some birds will stop at one successful nest. Other will keep making new nests throughout the season until basically the season's over. And, it's kind of amazing. I've got a bunch of mourning doves in this one park, and they just literally just keep using the same nest over and over again. The pigeons at Bart, they just keep using the same nest over and over again. So I'm going to talk about methods of nest searching. This was really something that I learned for my job, and this was kind of the framework that you used to help kind of figure out effort and how hard it was to find a nest. But I find this to be really helpful just in terms of thinking about how I would go about finding a nest. So the first one is just luck. Like this cactus wren nest is super big, you can't miss it. Second one is flushing the bird, which can be on purpose or an accident, and can kind of get into that a little bit. Systematic search is when you have an idea that there is a pair of birds in the in a general location, and you know what type of nest you're looking for, and so you just start going around and looking for it. Of course, parental behavior is just anytime you follow an adult bird. Nestling behavior is anytime typically that you hear nestlings. Non-behavioral clue is not super common, but that can be something like finding eggshells and just started looking around for a nest, or maybe you find sawdust from a woodpecker that's been excavating a cavity. And then previous year's site is very useful for birds who just pick the same location year after year. But really the best advice for nest searching is to just follow that bird and follow females specifically. Always look for material in a bird's bill, like I said, and just look for repeat visits to an area. So a couple more tips in terms of parental behavior. You can look for birds out of place, like for example, this Canada goose, which is nesting in a planter, which I just love, which is great. Also, when I say birds out of place, it could be something like an orange-crowned warbler. Orange-crowned warblers forage in treetops and generally don't go to the ground for any reason other than the fact that they nest on the ground. And another thing you want to look for are long direct flights. So this is a park by my house that I go to a lot, and I found a bush tit nest here a couple of years ago. And I saw a bird go from this bush all the way over to this little tree. And then it went to this next little tree. So that's an example of what, we say by long direct flight, especially if a bird is moving, they're at their nest, they're moving away from the nest in order to maybe search for food or search for nesting material. Then when they want to get back to the nest, they want to do it as quickly as possible. But usually what they'll do, instead of flying directly to the nest, they might make a little stopover, look around to check that maybe no predators are watching them, and then kind of fly. Or if it's a ground nesting bird, maybe even just like walk the last 5 to 6 feet so they can be kind of as sneaky as possible. So like I mentioned before, species where the females are the only ones that are incubating or brooding, they will get off the nest to feed themselves, and they'll move really quickly and they'll eat really fast when they're on an off bout. And for example, if you're watching a pair of birds, especially these like mate guarding birds like dark-eyed juncos, they'll be together. She'll be eating, he might be watching, and then if the female just disappears and then the male starts singing, she might have gone to a nest. And likewise, if you see some mate guarding birds, they will and chip and call to each other when she's about to get off the nest, and then sometimes even when she's about to get back on the nest. And like I mentioned, copulation will happen really close to the nest usually. So nervous behaviors, these are classic. Birds, they just don't want to go to their nest if you're watching. And so moving up and down, especially like if you see a bird with nest material or food and it's just sort of like flying around, looking at you, sometimes it'll look directly at the nest, like where it wants to go. Bill swiping is one where they'll actually just like swipe their bills on a branch. Obviously, alarm calling, making a lot of noise, dive bombing. I haven't had a lot of birds dive bomb me, but surprisingly, I've had a hermit thrush do that. Sitting very still and just sort of staring at you can actually be a suspicious sign. And of course, the broken wing display that we're all familiar with killdeer, But a lot of species do it, and I've even had an orange-crowned warbler do it to me once, which was really surprising. And my classic favorite is picking up nesting material and then dropping it when it sees you, which is just so funny to me every time. So if you see a bird exhibiting any of these kind of nervous behaviors, you just want to back up and then watch where it goes. So I had a couple of examples of this recently. I was birding in a cemetery recently, and this robin was just alarm calling as soon as I walked up. And I was trying to figure out what it was alarm calling about. And then I realized that there was a hawk, maybe, 20 yards away. And I'm like standing there and I'm watching, there's some bush shits at the top of the tree. And then I turn over and I look, and there's a pretty obvious robin nest like right in front of me. And so then the question is, well, is that robin nest active? Is it that bird's nest, or does it just happen to be near a nest? And so I ended up wandering away for a while, coming back, noticing that the hawk was gone and the robin was actually sitting on the nest. And last week I found a really obvious raven nest on an industrial building that the company I work for actually owns. And I couldn't see a bird on the nest, but I saw some ravens across the street, and they saw me. They saw me looking at the nest. Again, I was like, well, now I need to figure out if this nest is active, this nest is old. And I thought I was sneaky, and I went and I walked behind a bush, which was just ridiculous. The ravens were just like super onto me. They flew over. They saw me. They were just kept circling around, kind of back to the across the street. So finally, I walked away. I actually got in my car and drove back over to the nest. And by the time I got over there, the bird was sitting on the nest. So it went to the nest as soon as I walked away. So nestling behavior. Young nestlings are just silent, very quiet. And then older nestlings, as the nestlings grow, they're usually quiet, except for when the parent comes and feeds them. So brooding, parent sitting on the nest, the nestlings aren't making any noise. Parent leaves, usually they're still pretty quiet, though they might get a little more alert. But then when the parent comes and brings them food, then of course they're like up and begging. We've all seen robins, for example. Cavity nesters, however, they make a lot of noise. The nestlings make a lot of noise kind of all the time. Woodpeckers are super loud, make a lot of noise. And even the house sparrows that nest on my neighbor's eaves also make a lot of noise. Fledgling behavior. So I would encourage you to learn fledgling vocalizations of birds that are common locally to you. For me, dark-eyed juncos, white-crowned sparrows, sparrows in general, kind of the babies all kind of sound alike to me. So usually if I hear one, I'm like, oh, it's a sparrow fledgling, great. And if you hear young bird noises, and instead of being in one location, obviously stationary, but you're hearing them moving all around, then you've probably found fledglings. And if you're lucky enough to to see them, great visual confirmation. But sometimes it's really tough. Sometimes they might just be under dense cover. It depends what kind of habitat you're working in. And I did want to mention, so this adorable oak titmouse fledgling, you can see its bill has this yellow, what we call gape. So it kind of has these like this baby bill, baby mouth. That's a great kind of clue that the bird that you're looking at is a young bird. And then I also wanted to mention that cavity nesters can fly pretty well once they leave the nest. I mean, hummingbirds too. These birds are in the nest a lot longer than like an open cup nester, for example. So we actually had a discussion about this in the regional coordinator chat. If you see a bird that is obviously young, say like a house finch, but it has like little tufts of feathers on it, but it's at the top of the tree, obviously it can fly to the top of the tree, but we're still going to call it a fledgling because it's, probably not dispersed from its atlas block yet. And then I did want to talk about nest concealment. Nests are typically, they can be, like, as I say here, partially wholly or not at all concealed by surrounding vegetation. And it depends on the time of year, depends on the habitat, depends on the species. And sometimes birds will pick a spot, in a tree that hasn't leafed out yet, and then bam, in like, another week, you can't even see the nest anymore. But in general, birds like to build where they have clear sight lines and so that they can see predators coming and that they can get away quickly. And of course, birds that nest on open ground, like this killdeer on the bottom, they just want to use camouflage to their advantage. So I'm going to kind of go over tips by nest location type. I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly because I've talked for probably too long already. So tree nesting birds, obviously, parental behavior. Parental behavior is going to be key for all of these, but sometimes if you look up information about birds and how they like to nest, you might be able to actually discern sort of like the microhabitat of the tree that they like. Do they like an outer branch? Do they like to be near the trunk, etc.? Looking for unnatural nest materials like this Bullock's oriole that probably used. This was at a park that there's a lot of picnic tables. This was probably from like a party, like some kind of confetti or something. So if you see sort of like any kind of flashy color in a tree that shouldn't be there, or even if you see in a shrub kind of like grass sticking out or something, just look for things like that. I did want to talk about bush tits because obviously you all are not having a hard time finding bush tit nests because they're the number 2 in the atlas. But some people were mentioning how hard they can be to find. I love these nests because they're so fun and they're so cool and this is even like a really nice looking one. Sometimes they just look more like dryer lint than this. But if I see bush tits in an area, I usually just start looking for a nest. I mean, I'll follow the bush tits if I can and often do to a nest, but sometimes I'll literally just start looking around because sometimes they nest pretty low and pretty exposed. And I didn't really think that they would be like this, but I found a nest by my house that was right next to like a very obvious nest from last year. So there's literally a nest from this year and a nest from last year, right, like pretty much almost touching. It's just kind of wild. So for ground nesting birds, they can be susceptible to disturbance and flushing. You could try to systematically search for a ground nesting bird, and then maybe you're close to a nest. You're looking around, you're systematically searching, and then a bird flushes off the nest, and you're like, "Bam, I found it." A lot of ground nesting birds will allow you to get like very close before they actually will jump off the nest. I'm thinking about there was this one orange crowned warbler I had in Arizona where I could literally touch her because she would not get off the nest. And I had to flush her to check to see, if her eggs had hatched, etc. And it was my job and I was allowed to do it, but I just hated it. And she was a lot of respect to that bird. She was very tenacious and protecting her eggs. And then, like I mentioned, sorry, checking my notes. I think I already mentioned all these things, so I'm skipping ahead. Cavity nesting birds, they like to return to previous sites. They like to go to the same tree that they used before. If it's a secondary cavity nester, they might like to use even the same cavity year over year. Like I said, nestling behavior is a great way to find it. They will beg a lot. Shrub nesting birds. I love systematically searching for shrub nesting birds. It's just, I don't know, it's just really satisfying to me. But obviously, if you can watch a bird go to a shrub, great. This species here is a hermit thrush, and hermit thrushes, I just want to talk about them because I love them so much. They sometimes will build the stupidest, sloppiest, most obvious nest right on the edge of a shrub. They have bright blue eggs like a robin. You know, you just kind of look at it and you're like, there's a nest, it's right there. And so they can be really easy to find just by like walking around. I don't have experience with Swainson's thrushes. I don't know if they're the same, but if somebody knows, drop it in the chat. But these birds are so sneaky in terms of parental behavior that they will always drop nesting material if they see you 100% of the time. And I was trying to think in Arizona if I ever found one by nestlings begging, and I think the answer is no. And I think I never even found a nest by seeing a bird go to the nest with food either. I mean, just they're so aware of your presence and they're just so sneaky. And then we have these kind of like niche or niche nesters, like flycatchers. They like to use kind of like little shelves. There is a black phoebe nest that I know where they've nested for many, many years. Just, you know, classic at a park under, you know, the bathroom building or whatever, like on a little shelf in kind of a little alcove. And this nest in particular, I found because I saw a flycatcher. I saw this broken off snag that was maybe, you know, 4 feet high. And I said, that would be a great place for a flycatcher nest. And then I walked over and it was there. So once you start to kind of learn the kind of areas and microhabitats where birds like to nest, like you just start finding them. Oh, I found a mourning dove nest yesterday, actually, similarly. I was in a park with a trellis and I just said there's got to be a mourning dove nest up here and I just walked around until I found it. This is another nest that I just wanted to highlight just because I love it so much. So this is a dark-eyed junco nest and they nested here at least 2 years in a row. I haven't been back in a while, so I should check again. But you can kind of see the nesting material there kind of behind that cloth. And this is their little entry point. There is a one piece of wire that somebody bent up. I assume the junco didn't do that. So some person bent that up at some point and the birds just get in and out that way. And it's so clever and they're so safe from predators. So if you do find a nest and you can't see into it, it can be hard to determine the stage of the nest. You know, this has happened to me a lot. It's like you see something in the bill of a bird and you're like, was that food or was that nesting material? It's like not clear. Sometimes nest material can be hard to see, like spider webs. Some birds will frustratingly just continue to add nesting material throughout the cycle. So maybe you think you found a nest and they're still in the building stage, but they might actually have nestlings and they're just being weird. Just, you know, shoring up the foundations, I guess, of the nest. And like I said before, when the eggs hatch, usually that early nesting period resembles incubation. Some birds cooperatively breed, like pygmy nuthatches, which nobody told me for my first year in Arizona. And I was trying to figure out why these birds were never like leaving the nest and what was going on because there were just like all these birds around all the time going in and out of this cavity. And then I kind of wanted to talk about, and I'll talk about this in a minute, you know, what does it mean if you find a nest with one egg, for example? What if you see a bird at a nest and then you never see a bird there again and you can't see the contents? Like what happened? Actually, I'll go back to that. So if you see a bird at a nest once and then you never see a bird there again, the short answer is you probably don't know what happened. If it's early on in the breeding season, maybe assume it failed. If it's a little later, it could be a fledge or fail. It's just, you probably just don't know. And if you are trying to determine the stage of a nest, the best thing to do is just wait around. And the duration of a nest check really matters. That's one thing with using Nest Watch is it doesn't ask you to put in how many minutes you stayed there, which I think would be great if they made you do that because that can really show well, did you just look for 30 seconds or did you wait for 20 minutes to see if a woodpecker ever came out of that nest? So here's a couple of nests, did these nests succeed or did they fail? So this one on the left is actually a dark-eyed junco nest, and you can kind of see that there's fecal matter like around the edges. The edges of the nest are kind of maybe like flattened down. And that's a good sign that the nestlings kind of hopped up on the edge of the nest before they took, the plunge. And they just kind of, stood there and pooped for a minute while they like gathered their courage. And then this nest on the right is actually a red-faced warbler nest. If you know the stages of or the timing of the nest, if the eggs were just laid, 3 days ago and incubation just started, and then you come back and the eggs are gone, well, the eggs didn't magically hatch in those 3 days and the birds didn't fly away, so it failed, for example. It gets a little harder to tell when it's kind of like later in the nest cycle. But this nest on the right, I found it pulled out of its location and just like upside down, and all the nestlings gone. So you're like, yeah, okay, the nest failed. Some predator got it. This nest on the left is a good example of, if you find a nest with one egg, what happened. I just happen to know that this was a Canada goose nest where I had seen the bird incubating. And this egg was just a dud. It just didn't hatch. Sometimes eggs, they get cracked or they just don't get fertilized properly and they just don't hatch. And they might be one egg just kind of left over. On the right here, we have a house finch nest, and they are, very classically messy. They don't take the fecal sacs of the nestlings away. And so this rim of poop on the edge is a great sign of a successful nest. If you do find a nest and you want to find it again, here's just some suggestions of how you can find it again. I had a hummingbird nest this year that really stumped me. I found her building, and then the next time I went back, the nest just wasn't there. And I had taken a picture, so I was like confident that I had the right branch, but the nest just did not exist anymore. And I don't know what happened. Sometimes birds will, for some reason, abandon their nest site but reuse the nest material. So, a predator could have gotten it and totally knocked it clean off the branch, but it could have also been possible that she totally dismantled it and like rebuilt it somewhere else. So, we're at the end. I'm done. I just want to sum up. You got this. We're glad that you're taking part in the Atlas, and we're just really happy that you're contributing data in any way. As you're doing it, just be mindful of the bird's safety. Be patient, especially when you are monitoring nests to try to figure out if a nest is active or not. Do your research and just kind of look up some of the resources that already exist. And of course, reach out to your regional coordinators with any questions. All right, I'm done. I'm happy to not be talking anymore.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was incredible. What a joy to watch. And I know I'm not alone. That was, I learned a lot. And yeah, thank you so much. That was incredible. I had one question, which was, is there any species of bird in your area that breeds there that you've just never been able to find a nest for that bird?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's actually a ton, but spotted towhee is definitely one. I mean, part of it is also that, I'm so limited well, one, I have a 40-hour-a-week office job, so I'm just like inside. So I'm literally nest searching at like city parks downtown. And, I find a lot of nests, but I find a lot of nests of the same species over and over again. But, another thing is just, respecting those property boundaries and trails. And so if I'm at like a regional park, I'm not bounding off into the off trail to try to find nests and digging around in bushes. So Yeah, I'm sure there's so many species I haven't found. Like if it's not next to a trail, maybe I'm just not finding it.
A lot of thank yous in the chat. Feel free to put any other questions for Megan in the chat. And then we can also move on to a few questions that were submitted more generally about the Atlas. But first, wanted to kick it to Justin, putting you on the spot here. I know Justin's been doing a lot of, atlasing in the desert out in San Diego, which like county and beyond, and that I'd imagine there's some parts of that where the strategies are in the same framework. But um, just curious, Justin, if if I was going to go out to the desert next weekend, any desert specific kind of tips for finding nests or breeding out there?
I mean, the comment I just reiterate to people is just pick one bird and watch it for a while. Whether it's isolated habitat, you're just in sort of creosote and you stumble upon a black-throated sparrow or a Costa's hummingbird, just watch it, find the biggest bush like visible and like check that out for any birds visiting that. But yeah, those all those little canyon washes are really valuable places that offer a lot of opportunities kind of at the same time. Like those creosote squares are ecologically valuable, and there's a lot of atlas stuff out there, but it can be discouraging. If you go up some canyon, you've got canyon walls that provide shade. There's rock wrens, there's ravens and red-tailed hawks, and just there's sort of a lot more opportunity. So just look for complex topography and pick one bird and watch it until it does something. And ultimately it will. You might get bored, but it's generally rewarding just to take it one bird at a time.
Awesome. Yes, Sandy asked in the chat, thanks, great presentation. Will a recording be available? Yes, and we'll put this on our YouTube channel either later tonight or tomorrow morning. And then, Sam, did you have any comments or questions for Megan or related to her chat before we move on to other stuff?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Well, just thank you again, Megan, so much. As you could tell from the comments in the chat, extremely helpful. Megan nicely didn't name me as the person who was having a hard time finding bush tit nests, but that was me. It's just, I can't, it's like, you have your, um, nemesis bird. It's like my nemesis nest, I guess. But everyone else is fine. It's number two, and I can't. So that was so helpful. Lily asks if the nest location is very obvious. For example, in the only sycamore tree in a park or in a very obvious tree hole, should we give more vague details about the location? Sam, you want to answer that?
I thought you were reading for yourself for a second.
Oh,
I was clearing out the chat for you. I'm
okay.
so sorry.
No, I can answer. If the nest location is very obvious, so I think this question is asking about, you know, kind of whether or not to disclose the location of a nest. Yeah, what would you say to that?
Um, I think it's fairly context dependent. Generally, if a bird is nesting in a busy park where there's lots of people around, they kind of went into it knowing that, and that is a part of their immediate environment. If it's a sensitive or protected species, I think it'd be totally justifiable to not give super specific instructions on how to find a specific nest. If the park is large and your checklist is covering a large distance, I think it's going to be hard anyway, or a person would find it on their own regardless. So um, for most species, I think you're okay, but we don't necessarily need the specific details. You could say like you could record the coordinates for yourself and say coordinates available on request for future reference. But just like describing the kind of habitat and the tree species and things like that is going to be enough in combination with where your general checklist location was.
Yep, great. Dan did have one great note, just a reminder that for state and federally listed species, disturbance could be considered harassment. Um, and and so and in some cases illegal. So obviously do your research in terms of that. Um, Sylvia asked the question, how should we record an owl nest location? I think the answer would be pretty similar to what Sam just said, context dependent. Some owls are sensitive species on eBird, so those will be obscured anyway. And yeah, kind of context dependent there. Sam, do you want to move on to more general Atlas questions? And we'll try to wrap it up by 8:30.
Yeah, there are a few that people pre-submitted. Um, and there was one I wanted to kind of answer by showing everyone how I myself would go about answering it. Sorry, I don't have it pulled up, but the kind of uh questioner asked if I think in the last dispatch we talked about spotted towies and how they'd been confirmed in 100 blocks at that point. I don't remember exactly, but it hadn't been confirmed yet. And the person asked if anyone had found a spotted towhee nest yet. So the way I would do that is I'd go to the Macaulay library and I would type in spotted towhee and I'd pull them up and you can filter by location to California. And then date, you could do this year, current year. And then over here under filters, there is tags. So you can filter by nests. And we can see if anyone has submitted a towhee nest. And indeed, April 14th, so hot off the presses, someone photographed and reported and tagged a towhee nest. So by tagging your photos, you make these kinds of quick searches like much easier. So please do go ahead and do that. The same person asked if there are any targets left in Orange County. And of course there are. There's still lots to be learned and there's still lots to be learned even once something is confirmed. You can do that in multiple blocks and other behaviors are valuable. But I just wanted to show you here. If you go to Explore and then go to Orange County, here's one way to kind of look for targets and kind of screen for what those could be. What I like to do is sort on the number of probable. So this counts how many blocks each species has been coded as probable in. And now I'm going to scroll down and just scan for ones where there's zeros in the confirmed column. So here's one. Kestrel's been coded as probable in 12 blocks, but has not been confirmed. Cinnamon teal, I don't know their status in orange, but a couple have been coded as probable but not confirmed. And Bell's Vireo. So that, you could keep going down the list and look for yourself. But I just wanted to show people that's kind of a quick way to scan for targets. And you can do that not just for counties, but you could do that for individual blocks or the state as a whole as well by using this Explore Regions page.
Awesome. I wanted to ask a question that the legendary Debbie Shearwater asked in the chat. And this is themes of this question have been asked several times, but I think it's always good that we kind of, refresh. Debbie asks, why should I code a singing bird that I absolutely know does not breed in my county? And Sam, maybe I'll have you answer that if you don't mind.
Yeah, so this is getting at the idea that the S code is a possible code, which when you read the description says, it's possibly breeding in the county, but a lot of birds are singing on migration or even on their wintering ranges to a certain degree, and they're not known or definitely don't breed in that county. We have taken the approach where we're encouraging anyone to, if you hear a bird singing, to put that S code on there. And the reasons at a large scale are that it requires really kind of fine-grained knowledge about when migrants are moving through to be able to kind of make that call. and we'd have to provide safe dates, which is what other atlases have done, and those are going to vary really widely over the whole entire state. And at the same time, if if you know that it doesn't breed in that county, we have the ability to like filter things by location and date to kind of do that sort of determination at a really large scale all at once in a consistent way across everybody's observations that we're able to then like talk about and say how we did it, and someone could repeat that approach and change the assumptions if they wanted to. So we also can learn things about like the really early stages of the breeding cycle, like when pair formation is starting, when courtship is starting, when the singing behavior is starting for these species that are migrating. So it is all useful scientific and ecological information, and we'll be able to kind of parse it out in a consistent way at the back end. So that's why we made that decision to simplify it, and we have the tools to address it. It's also, I tell people to not stress too much about the HNS codes because they are the lowest level codes and they come with these issues, and we're gonna have to be careful about how we use them anyway. So yeah.
Awesome. And then last question, and then we'll end it for the night. Carter asks, I bird every day on my university campus, and I know of several active nests. However, on some checklists, I go past the nests, especially cavity nests, and don't see any birds present, and end up putting S7 or no code at all for that species. Is this the right thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So you should be coding it like you see it or like you hear it on that day on that checklist. And it's okay if it was confirmed yesterday, but not today. And that's actually really useful information on our end to know just how likely it is that you detect a breeding bird, given that we know it's breeding there. And that's going to be useful for the analyses elsewhere as well. So always submit the codes based on basically what you observed on that day. And that is totally fine, even if it's a downgrade from a previous day.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. You're always amazed at the number of people who attend these. Thanks again to Megan Jankowski for an amazing presentation. I'll be posting this on the YouTube. And as always, feel free to reach out to this email address, and we'll get back to you on any other follow-up questions that you have, any ideas, anything at all. And thank you to Justin, who is our other review coordinator, and Justin and Megan have been doing an incredible job, and very grateful for both of them. So yeah, with that, thank you all very much, and have a fantastic Friday because you deserve it. I know that you do. And find some birds nesting. All right. Thank you, everybody.